Hello and welcome to another episode of Learning to Draft, number 12, where we will look at Bilgewater and the Bilgewater region pairings. Bilgewater currently is one of the weakest region in editions, and there are multiple reasons for it, and I kind of want to showcase those regions, because Bilgewater used to be fine, but they changed some of these card buckets pretty significantly and made them weaker. And yeah, we will just talk about these changes and all of the Bilgewater champions. I really like Bilgewater. It was my favorite region when I was starting out, just having these jagged budget draws, going multiple 1-drops and rushing my opponents down was something I really enjoyed. And I like the design of the region. I like pirates. And yeah, I just think all of the champions have something unique, something cool that can't be said about every region. Okay, let's start with the mono Bilgewater bucket, the first to the draw. And this one is built around probably my favorite design champion. And Twisted Fate, I think, is a fantastic design because you can do so much with him, and he gives a region something that it doesn't have on its own, which is removal. If you think back about our region list and the strengths and weaknesses, the big weakness of Bilgewater is that it doesn't have good removal. It has Maggot Rain, Parley, and some expensive stuff like Sunk Cost, but doesn't really have this efficient mid-range removal that you really need. Of course, in Constructed, Parley, Maggot Rain see a lot of play. Because in Constructed, you have a lot more swarm units, a lot more ways to deal the follow-up damage, for example, or you just don't care about damage because you have a Sejuani in your deck. Won't always be the case. And Twisted Fate is an excellent champion because Twisted Fate gives you a ton of different interaction that Bilgewater doesn't actually have access to. And I really like it when your champion does something different and helps your region this way. Twisted Fate 4-mana 2/2 doesn't pass the vanilla test, but on play he plays one of the destiny cards. The go-to one, if you have nothing better to do, would be the blue one. Refill one spell mana, draw one. At the very least, is a 4-mana 2/2 that draws a card. Decent. The usual one is the red card, deal 1 to all enemies and enemy nexus. Notably, this also triggers your plunder effects, so you can activate your plunder cards and just clean up a big board. This also works with powder kegs. And the single target one is the gold card, deal 2 and stun the strongest enemy. This is also one of the two only stun effects in Bilgewater. The other one is the Nautilus signature spell. And yeah, I just find this design pretty amazing. And once if he's seen you draw 9+ cards, this has been nerfed in the past, it used to be 8, then he levels up, and then on each of the first times you play a Destiny card, I play Destiny card, it's always the same order, by the way. It's always blue card, into red card, into yellow card. So each turn, then if you play 3 cards, you get to cycle between those 3 Destiny cards. Flip card has been nerfed as well. It used to be a 3-mana, place a card into your deck to draw 3. Now it's 2-mana, draw 2. And 2 fleeting. This is of course way weaker and doesn't help Twisted Fates level up anymore as fast as he did. And yeah, I just really like what they did and the flexibility Twisted Fate offers. And I think from a champion standpoint, he always has something to offer your deck. You'll either lack the AoE effect, you will otherwise lack the stun effect, or just a decent value unit if all of the other ones don't do anything. Very cool card. The first to the draw bucket used to have a bunch of sea monsters in it and was about card drawing, which might make sense. Most of these, or all of these sea monsters have been removed from this bucket. Then you have now a bunch of early game units and a bunch of weird cards like Lounging Lizard, Brash Gambler, cards you don't really want in your deck. Also the Jagged Taskmaster, if only 2 1-drops in the pool. And in the space, for example, Bayou Branch, Loaded Dice, Strong Arm, just some random cards that don't really do that much for you. Overall, I would now classify this first to the draw as a mid-range deck, and the 2 cards that distinguish it from the other Twisted Fate, Jailbreak and Petty Officer, The officer, of course, is great with Twisted Fate. You can summon a Powder Keg, and he deals 2 to everything, or he stuns for 3. That's pretty useful. Otherwise, I don't show these spell unit generators in the spell section because you don't really have to play around them. I also don't show card draw effects in the spell section here. So for the spells, the fast bit interaction card is Make It Rain. Then we have Parley, Strong Arm, and Sunk Cost as the main interaction. And of course, you have the single target pings. And then you have the expensive, like this one is pretty bad. You can only place a follower in your hand. And this one, I think, is playable, but you don't really want it in your deck. A hard removal. And this is why what Bilgewater shares with Bandle City. Bandle City also has a lot of pings. And then some quote-unquote situational hard removal you place on top of the deck, or the Minimorph, of course, Minimorph just a busted card. But yeah, this is the first of the draw bucket, but I have to sadly say this bucket doesn't give you any direction. So just a random Bilgewater midrange deck will just be way weaker than a Demacia midrange deck, a Freljord midrange deck, whatever. And yeah, he is a good support champion, but this first to the draw bucket just doesn't have any direction anymore. It used to be a card draw and doesn't do that anymore. Second one, Twisted Fate, is the so-called Smash and Grab bucket. In my opinion, this is the best Bilgewater bucket to be in right now, unless you try to do some specific things. Take a look here. This one's paired up with Vi. Vi wants to, he levels up when she gets more attack, when you play another card, and wants to basically see you play a bunch of cards. And once you play a bunch of cards, you would run out of cards, so you want to draw more cards, and this is where Twisted Fate comes in. Basically, you want to play a bunch of cheap units and draw a bunch and go from there. And this card pool is actually like well built, I would say. It's a bunch of card draw in it, salvage, pilfered goods are just good ways to refuel your hands. It also has Lola dice, sadly, and pick a card. A bunch of random stuff added in as well. Also, as Slotbot, this is very sad. Like, Slotbot used to be in like 4 to 5 buckets, and it was a very fun card, never broken in expeditions or anything. Just a fun card that should shift up a little bit, and it basically got removed from all the buckets and only lives in this Smash and Grab one now. Then with Troll Hunters, it is also in the Sea Monster bucket. Also a very strong card, just 3 mana, deal 4 damage, which is very good for a Bilgewater deck. And then you also get a Sea Monster out of the deal. Yeah, this card pool focused on card draw, and I would also classify it as a mid-range deck. The distinguishing cards are Troll Hunters and Slotbot, and this is probably the only bucket that has pocket aces in it. Didn't find it anywhere else, which is the only combat trick in Bilgewater. Grant an ally +2/+1. And we have again Sunk Cost here as interaction. Of course, Troll Hunters also counts as interaction. Yeah, in my opinion, this is the best Bilgewater bucket. I always love picking it up and playing with it. Move on to Misfortune. Misfortune is like Riven and Noxus, where she has 4 different buckets in Bilgewater. So she's quite popular. Start with the first and original one. This is the Scouted Out. And this one pairs Misfortune up with Quinn. Quinn has the same level up condition. I've seen you attack 4 times. And she also has the Scout effect. So Misfortune also, let's look at her. She levels up when she's seen you attack 4 times. There's different ways you can achieve this. You can just have her on the board for 8 turns and attack 4 times normally. You can go for Scout attacks, for rallies. There are multiple different ways to achieve this level up. But what does she do first of all? She's a 3 mana 3/3, so good stat line already. And when allies attack, deal 1 to all battling enemies and the enemy nexus. So that's only battling enemies, it's not a Namibian effect, but you can really make your opponent's trades awkward while also activating Plunder and dealing a lot of damage to the board incidentally. And when she levels up, she does that for 3 times basically. So, and she has Overwhelm. So when you level up Misfortune, you basically win the game unless they can remove her like 1 or 2 turns later. Just getting 3 damage on each attack is just so insane. The Nexus, and basically all the units can't be blocked or they just die. this Misfortune Aura. So really powerful card, powerful effect. Fortunately, you have to work for flipping her. If you just attack normally for 4 turns and your opponent can't deal with your 3/3, then they probably would have won this game anyways. Happening oftentimes is you play this on turn 3 attack, and then they play on turn 5 a Screeching Dragon, and you have to like come up with a way to not lose your Misfortune to a Screeching Dragon. Or they play a Get Exiled, Aftershock, anything like that. Flip card is also pretty good. It's just Make It Rain and just a good AoE spell and ping. Yeah, quite useful as well if you're in combat. You can set up the Misfortune trigger that deals 1 to everything, and then you can follow it up with a Make It Rain that oftentimes clears the board. So this first pairing is with Quinn, and it's called Scouted Out because it has like scout units in it. And this card pool used to be very sick because it was just a normal mid-range deck, and you had like a bunch of like Genevieve and Cythria, the middle one, 6/6, and all of the scout units. And they changed it as well, added like Bio Branch into it, Playful Trickster, the Snapjaw Swarm. Of course, it's not a card you want in your non-lurk deck. Would be a very weird combo enabler if you just put it into normal deck. And yeah, Razor Scale Hunter is the only Bilgewater scout unit that's left, and Razor Scale Hunter is very strong. Of course, Lariat Rose is also very strong, but she's in like multiple buckets. And we still have a decent early game curve here, but in the mid game it's just really lacking. You have no 3-drop after, you have only Misfortune basically here, and 4, 5, 6 are a little bit thin spread as well. So yeah, this is a mid-range, still a mid-range archetype. You just play units on curve and then try to level up your Misfortune with the Demacia scout units. There's no card that's not in any other Misfortune buckets, so I just left out this distinguishing segment. And the spells are Make It Rain, Playful Trickster, and Double Up. Double Up always a card you can keep in mind. It's not really played that often in expeditions, but can be surprised, deal for damage, since Decimate doesn't exist. And Playful Trickster is just not really playable. Get the idea that you like attack with Misfortune, they block Misfortune, you remove her, and then you attack again. Oftentimes this doesn't really work out that well. Yeah, so much to the Scouted Out. Let's move on to Moonlit Heist. And this is the Bilgewater Targon combination. This one is paired up with Diana. And it's just a little bit of a random card pool, I would say. Never really understood this idea behind this. So Diana, of course, is the Nightfall champion. Levels up when you've activated Nightfall 4 times. And there is no Nightfall in Bilgewater. And there is no Scout, for example, in Targon. I guess you can use the Challenger with the Diana, Challenger unit into combat and then trigger Misfortune. That's like a one-time thing because your Diana will be like losing Challenger again. So yeah, I never really understood the idea of this deck. And basically what it boils down to, you look at this curve over here, you have a bunch of 1-drops, bunch of 2-drops, bunch of 3-drops. So hyper aggressive. And then basically it falls down super hard. We have like 2 epics here and the Cloven Way, which is decent. Basically in Bilgewater, you don't have anything after turn 3 or after 3 mana. This is an epic, this is an epic, this is an epic. Just hyper aggressive, which has its place. It's not terrible to draft this, but if I want to be hyper aggressive, I would rather draft Misfortune, like Bilgewater Noxus, Bilgewater Demacia, Bilgewater Shurima even, like anything aggressive. And the last thing I would go for would be Targon. So if I want to play Targon, I want to play like more mid-rangey, more slow. And yeah, this combination just doesn't really make that much sense to me. But yeah, I would classify this as a swarm deck. You just try to go super wide and then have you like challenge away the units while you profit from your opponents not blocking because of the Misfortune aura. And one distinguishing card is Coil Creatures. This doesn't live in any other Misfortune card pool. And these spells are Warning Shot. Not really for any purpose, it's just there. You don't really have that many plunder cards. And Make It Rain again, and Sleight of Hand. Sleight of Hand, not really a playable card. But you can sometimes, especially in the lower ranks, see it and like lose to it. So it's like a consideration to just avoid to activate Plunder. Yeah, I would just say this is a weak combination. If you want to play this Moonlit Heist Bilgewater side, just pick up Noxus. If you want to play the Targon side, just pick up Shadow Isles and play a Nightfall deck. That's better than combining Bilgewater and Targon, and I've really rarely seen this combination together at all, because it just doesn't make much sense in my opinion. Okay, next up we have Vulnerable, and this and the next one and a few more got added later on. Like after Bilgewater release, they made like one update where they added a bunch of new card buckets into the game. For example, the Kindred one, Melody, and this is another one that's called Vulnerable. We've seen the Shurima side already with Renekton, and yeah, it was basically a copy of the Challenger card bucket. This is a little bit different from the others because it has a bunch of mid-range units, and basically the synergy is you have Renekton who wants to have your who gets like his level up, his buff when you challenge an enemy, and then you have a bunch of vulnerable givers in Bilgewater and can combine this vulnerable with this vulnerable. And Misfortune also likes to have the enemy units vulnerable because you can set up fortunate combats. For example, if they play like a Bloodthirsty Marauder, you can give it vulnerable, drag it into combat, and Misfortune shoots it down. So this combination makes sense. Some of the cards in it, like Wise Fry, don't really make sense. I get that it says vulnerable, but it's like a one-time joke, and then you will have a card in your deck that you never want to play, basically. Yeah, I don't really find this funny or something. Like, it should be more about balance, not about, yeah, this card is vulnerable, let's put it into the vulnerable bucket. Overall, this is another mid-range deck. You try to play your good 3-drop, your good 4-drop, then set up your good combats, and basically win through turns 5 to 7. And this can actually work out well. I like to have Demacian in the mix as well. I think we recorded one run already with this vulnerable bucket. And the two unique cards are Brash Gambler and Wise Fry. Brash Gambler at least makes a little bit of sense, because the problem is if you attack with this, you draw 2 cards, then they will just block it and it dies. Set up a combat so that like a 1/1 has vulnerable, you can create this in. And I guess this one, if you like have 5 units on the board, you deal 1 to them, and you have an overwhelm card. But I think it's more about this having vulnerable, and that's why it is in the vulnerable bucket. For the spells, we have all the vulnerable givers. The list, Yibin Wand, and Chum the Waters. Chum the Waters is the best removal spell in Bilgewater. Just 4 mana, deal 5 damage, or push some damage. You can also like make a 2/1 vulnerable, then just push 4 damage. Quite strong. The other 2 cards a little bit more setup cost. Of course, the list combos with Misfortune. If a unit vulnerable, then you free attack it. That's a free attack for Misfortune's level up. So this is quite a cool card with Misfortune, actually. Yeah, I like playing with vulnerable. It's a fun archetype. I wouldn't say it's like overpowered or anything. It's just a fun, decent mid-range archetype. Move on to the next one, Opportunity Attacks, which is Bilgewater Ionia. And this pairs Misfortune with Irelia. And yeah, Irelia also wants you to see attacked, or wants you to see attack. And she has this blade dance mechanic, which allows you to put in these blades for free. And the blade dance triggers Misfortune. And this is basically a combo deck where you have these payoffs for attacking, like Fractured Corsair, and I guess this is the only line, and Misfortune, and Aurelia. And then you have like stuff that wants to be buffed up, or gets buffed when you summon multiple units, like Moonlit Duo, and summon. And the Bilgewater half is basically, I don't know what really the Bilgewater purpose is. One cool combo you can do with Blade Dance is that like a Taskmaster. You buff up these blades, because blades are actually 1-cost allies. Then your blades are 2/1s, which is like fun. But Jagged Taskmaster is an epic, so you are not really guaranteed to see it at all. So yeah, for this one, I would say this is a fast combo deck. You play a lot of weird cards in it, like the Lurkers, the Snapshot Swarm, or the Scouts. Like the Scout unit, this Navigate is actually really good. I would wish they just put it into every bucket, especially in the Scouted Out bucket, and it's literally a Scout unit. Used to be in Scouted Out, but they removed it for whatever reason. Yeah, and this is basically a fast combo deck. You try to flip your Misfortune as fast as possible with the Aurelia and Blade Dance, and then you have your level up Misfortune and attack multiple times and just deal infinite damage to them. spells are Playful Trickster, the list, and Strong Arm. Notice that Strong Arm is not mentioned in the official spreadsheet. I've given them this information like multiple times now. They didn't update it so far, but it has been confirmed that Strong Arm is also living in opportunity attacks, which doesn't really make sense to me. It lives there. But ultimately, I have to say that this combo is bad. It might be working out constructed when you have like triple Misfortune, triple Aurelia, and can set up your board, and you have your triple Taskmaster that buffs up your blades. Then this combo makes sense. But Expeditions, which will just start with one Misfortune, one Aurelia, and then you will never get this to work, and then you will be stuck with like Playful Tricksters, the lists, and Scepter Swarms, and your whole deck will just not do anything. So yeah, I would just avoid this combo. It doesn't really work out. Of course, this Misfortune is okay, but she's really geared towards leveling up fast. Yeah, let's move on to the Gangplank, recently nerfed. Gangplank is a 5-mana 5/4 who has Overwhelm, so already decent deadlines. Used to be a 5/5, now a 5/4. And when he's summoned, you summon a Powder Keg. Powder Kegs are like these 0/1 that stack. So if you summon multiple Powder Kegs, it's still on 1. They can't attack or block and are vulnerable, so your opponent can just challenge them and destroy them. It's pretty funny sometimes, because if you have like they play Runeterra, they challenge this and they get a buff. And it basically buffs up your spells and skills once. So if you play like a Parley, for example, it says deal 1 to anything, and this would augment it to 2, but then explode and be destroyed. The main problem with Powder Keg is that it's vulnerable and your opponent can just interact with it. Of course, I think it's a good design that it's vulnerable, because otherwise it would be obnoxious to deal with. And it's helping interactivity if you don't have like this permanent spell mana lying around whenever you need it. So I like the design, but it's just a little bit weak in Expeditions. And level up for Gangplank is that you've damaged the enemy nexus in 5 different rounds. Now, if you've achieved this only through attacking, that would be very hard to do, since you would have to, if you attack on 1, you would level up by turn 9, because you like attack each other turn only. And so you want these direct damage effects. Like if you know him from Constructed, you have like Parley and warning shots and stuff like that. And when you level up, he is pretty powerful. He deals on attack 1 to all enemies and enemy nexus, but I have to say, you very rarely level him up in positions if you want to have a good deck. The reason for that is because you can't just play all of these direct damage spells like in Constructed, since in Constructed you have Sejuani, and Sejuani will just shut down the whole board over and over again. And in Expeditions, you just don't consistently get these effects off. You don't draw them consistently. And just putting like a warning shot into your deck to level up your Gangplank is usually not worth it, because you want each of your cards to be good on their own. Now, this card bucket is paired up with Swain, and the basic idea behind it is that you use the Powder Kegs and then some of these big effects, these big spells. Basically, you play like a Death Lotus for 2, and then it levels up your Swain, and your Swain is like doing more damage. But I would just advise you to stay away from the Powder Keg synergies that just really don't work out in Expeditions, and oftentimes you just like 2-for-1ing yourself. You like go Powder Keg or more powder into Parley, then that's a 2-for-1, even if you kill like a good unit with it. This card pool works out the best as just a mid-range deck. You have your good 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops, 5 like your champions, and 6 in even some epic late game if you come that far, plus good removal. So this card bucket, I would say, is decent if you just draft it as a mid-range deck. The Powder Keg synergy just doesn't really work out, sadly. Yeah, it's a mid-range deck. The main different cards are the Dreadway Deckhand and Petty Officer from the other Gangplank. And yeah, it has Burst Speed, Shakedown, and Line him up. Yes, Shakedown works with Powder Kegs. I think the main idea is you can just deal 2 to your Powder Keg and give enemies vulnerable. It's actually not a bad play. Line up, I really like. It's a 3-mana Mystic Shot. slow, but it has multiple other flexible things you can do with it. Double up Scrapshot. I also really like Scrapshot. It's basically a vengeance. There's only a few things that 7 damage doesn't kill, and the toss 3 can oftentimes be more of an upside than a downside. Then we have Parley. Parley is a decent card. Sometimes it's really bad. You think about playing against dragons, they have no thing you want to kill for 1. Even if you like jump block, if you have a 3/3 dragon, jump block, it will never go down to 1 health for you to parley it. This is a very situational card, and I would just stay away from these kegs because kegs are bad. Shouldn't really draft around them in Expedition. The other one is the Raiding Party, and this is the archetype you should know from Constructed. So if you take a look at this is paired with Sejuani, and at the time of this recording, the Gangplank Sejuani is a very strong, or even like the strongest deck in the meta. And this tries to basically be that deck, but in a very weird way. You have like cards like Dungeon Lizard, Ember Maiden, and even Golden Narwhal, just to set up your plunder effects or your damage on each round. Even a warning shot, and Powder Pandemonium is in there. And yeah, it kind of misses a 4-drop slot. Like, it used to have the 4-cost Allegiance card that used to live here, if I remember correctly. They cut it out, now we only have Wolf Ride and Freljord. And yeah, it's just have like a little bit of a hole in here. 6/5 is a champion. But yeah. Overall, I would still say this is like a decent archetype. Of course, Sejuani, if I didn't showcase her, she levels up like, then you should give damage to in Nexus in 5 different rounds. And once she levels up, she frostbites all enemies each round the first time you damage the enemy Nexus, which is a insane effect. Basically kills every other mid-range deck, but it's just a little bit hard to achieve. So this kind of plays out like sometimes like a low combo deck, like combo control deck, where you just try to reach your champions. But I would just advise you as well to play this as a mid-range deck. You have these decent 1-drops and some 2-drops and some value and pilfer goods, a good champion. So yeah, I would just play this as a mid-range deck as well. The different cards are Dungeon Lizard and Black Market Merchant. And Warning Shot, Line Up live here. Also Monster Harpoon. I said the Thunderbolt is the best Bilgewater removal spell. I stand by that. It's just so flexible. Monster Harpoon is like the second best in of course it's better than Constructed because you can reliably make it cost 3 in Expedition. That's not that easy. You have to sometimes cast it for 6. Makes it a little bit worse. But yeah. And then we also have the Boom Ship randomly, and Parley and Sleight of Hand Strongarm. Don't play those 2 cards. Don't play the Boom Ship either. Yeah, this is the Raiding Party archetype. Then let's move on to Fizz. Fizz technically has 3 archetypes. Only 2 of them are like in Bilgewater though. The other one is where he is in Bandle City, but we also will talk about that. Icon is wrong here, sorry about that. But the first one is Spell Slingers, Bilgewater, and Ionia. And this one is paired up with Lee Sin. Both Fizz and Lee Sin level up when you've cast a bunch of spells. Fizz is 6 spells, Lee Sin is 8 spells. Yeah, let's take a look at Fizz first. He's now a Yordle, 1-mana 2/1. And that's it. And then you have like a small effect. When you cast a spell, stop all enemy spells and skills targeting me and give me elusive this round. But the reason I've said that's it is because this first effect rarely, if ever, comes into play in Expeditions. You have to like play a spell to give him elusive first. It's nice, and he's a 1-mana 2/1 elusive, but there's like common cards that do that. And this stop enemy spells and skills targeting me is pretty rare in Expeditions because you just don't have this big bulk of removal like in Constructed. You want to throw at your opponent's cards. It's a little bit more rare in Expeditions. So once you've cast 6 spells, he turns into a 3/2 and the same elusive effect and a Nexus Strike. Create a Jump the Waters in hand. Jump the Waters, of course, being the 4-mana spell that summons a Longtooth and gives the enemy vulnerable. And yeah, this is Longtooth. And Fizz's flip is just the Playful Trickster. Doesn't really make sense to me because like you don't kind of want to hit the Nexus with Fizz. I would do like Guess you can rally with him. That's kind of okay. But yeah, it's like pretty hard already to flip Fizz unless you're playing like Bandle City and random spell generators. And it's even more a problem. It doesn't even do that much if oftentimes Fizz will just get blocked by a 2-1 elusive. Or once you go down on the mana enough, you can just be like Mystic Shot or stuff, or you have to trade it away for opponents preferring Glory Seeker. Just gets eaten by a Screeching Dragon. Of course, it's a 1-drop, so it's fine if it gets eaten by Screeching Dragon. But Fizz rarely is more than a 1-mana 2-1 with sometimes elusive. My experience at least. From this archetype, this is like trying to turbo level Fizz, and it has a decent swarm archetype with Marai Warden, Marai Songstress. Those also don't show up in like Expeditions spreadsheet, but they are in here. And double trouble, just having the ability to go wide. And no Shelly, sadly. But yeah, you have like random spell payoffs. The main problem is that Bilgewater, as we talked about before, doesn't have any good spells. That's just what the region is about. You don't have this good removal. Best card is Chum the Waters. And yeah, even Ionia side doesn't really have that strong spells. Steal and Follow, Steel Tempest. Don't really want those in your deck either. A little bit of a, I would say, weird one that you call this Spell Slingers, while it doesn't really have that many good spells in it. But it has a bunch of spell payoffs at least. Laws of the Dragon, the Marai Songstress, Bissell Guard. That makes sense for this to exist. I would like to see Fizz being replaced with Nami, though. That would make a little bit more sense. But it's just my personal opinion. Overall, I would say this is still a mid-range deck. You play your units on curve, and eventually you flip your Fizz, you cast a bunch of spells, and then you get in for elusive damage. The unique cards versus the other Fizz are Coral Creatures and Marai Songstress. And as spells, we have Line 'em Up, Playful Trickster, and Charm the Waters. And of course, Mind Meld. Mind Meld is not a real card you should play around, but it exists and people like drafting it in my experience. Although it usually is not that strong unless the game goes super long. This leads us to the second out of 3 Bilgewater PNC buckets. This one's called Fishbones, and this is one of my favorite designed buckets because it does something different to the originals. Basically, Fishbones has a bunch of 1-drops. This is the 1-drop build around. And you will almost always start with the Jagged Taskmaster. Plunder grants 1 cost values everywhere, +1 +0. And Professor 1 Yip, when you summon a 1-cost ally, granted +2/+2. Those two are like pre-given to you. And then, depending on which other region you move in, you will see 1-cost cards from this other region as well. Can't really showcase that in here because it doesn't allow the mobility side doesn't allow more than 2 regions. But I find it's pretty cool and it's really unique. And yeah, just a cool designed bucket. It's paired up with Jinx. Jinx wants you to see your hand empty. And then when she levels up, she like draws you more cards and has like burn. Like a Death Rocket, for example. So she fits into this very aggressive style, and you have a bunch of 1-drops. Refuel cards, Hired Gun. Basically no bad cards in this bucket at all. Cool, in my opinion. So yeah, I would say Fishbones is like probably the second or third best Bilgewater bucket. Just if you like want to Bilgewater plus X. And I always have fun drafting Fishbones. It's a swarm archetype, and the main difference between the other Fizz is that you play a bunch of 1-drops and will oftentimes have this Jagged Taskmaster. Of course, it will often be given to you in your first pick combined with Fizz and the 1 Yip. The only spell in here, funnily enough, that does something is Chum the Waters, but that's fine. I would rather have Chum the Waters and nothing else than like Strong Arm and Sunk Cost and stuff like that. A really fun archetype, so I would definitely recommend you trying it out if you never did it. Just swarming your opponent down with 1-cost cards is very, very fun. This leads us to the other Fizz. He's Bandle City and Nami. And this is a new archetype called Playful Pranks. And let's talk about Nami here because she is the Bilgewater champion. So Fizz also is Bilgewater. What Nami is doing, she is a 3-mana 2/3 attune. Not amazing with the stat line, but still playable. It's like a worse Grumble Slug if you just play it for the stat line. But then he has the effect when you cast a spell, grant +1/+0 to the weakest other ally that isn't immobile. The mobile line is only for the powder kegs, so it doesn't buff up your powder kegs and doesn't get in the way with Bilgewater. So I really like that they included it. And her level up is that you've gained 8+ spell mana this game. And when she levels up, she instead grants +2/+1, which is pretty powerful. So leveling up Nami usually goes like this. You pass on turn 1, you 1, pass on turn 2, that gives you 3. Then on turn 3, you play a 3-cost spell, for example, Double Trouble, gives you 6. And then on turn 4, you want to play another 3-cost spell, and then a 2-drop, or another 3-cost spell, and then Nami. It also levels her up on turn 4 or 5, basically. There's probably like some meme combinations where you can level up even faster with like Coral Creatures and the 1-cost card that doesn't even live here. But yeah, overall, Nami wants to have you cast a bunch of spells, have usage for the spell mana. You just pass your first 3 turns and then doesn't use the spell mana ever. That's not going to work out well for you. And yeah, flip spell is Ebb, which is a pretty bad card. So you don't really want the downside of having multiple Namis in your deck that you have this Ebb. But at least it makes sense that it is like 3 spells in one. So you can use it to trigger your Nami multiple times, but this is generally not a card I want in my deck. The combination between Bandle City and Bilgewater is one you see in Constructed as well. We have like these pranks and other puss, Kelp Maidens generating pranks, Prank of course being this 1-mana focus card, and you use those generated spells and, for example, Contrologist also generating your spell, and have the payoff cards in Bilgewater. So Nami is a big payoff for casting spells, Mariah Songstress, Abyssal Guard, Lead Admiral Shelley, and Avatar of the Tides, to basically enable your Nami and enable the other cards and get a big effect out of it. Also, Shellfold lives here, so you can technically build a Shellfold deck with this Playful Pranks. One thing I don't like about this bucket that much is if you look at the spells. So first of all, we'll classify this as a swarm deck. You want to go wide with this and want to have, by the way, does it have Double Trouble in it? I want to double check. No, sad. You want to like move into other regions where you have access to Double Trouble, because if you only cast Tidal Wave, it's not that strong, or Pivot Goods. Doesn't really go with Nami that well. Okay, the spells in it are Ebb and Make It Rain and Tidal Wave. Don't really like Tidal Wave. Mention it, it's just dealing random damage. Same with Ebb. It's just not really good enough. Like Make It Rain, if you only have 2 units, you can set it up. Only gets random if they have like 3 or more units. At that point, you are more likely to hit these units, so it's fine. Ebb is just always random. If you just 2 mana, deal 2 to the Nexus and don't do anything else, that's not a card you want in your deck. Overall, I think Nami is fine, not the strongest, but definitely still playable. One thing you could do to buff Nami is to just add Double Trouble and the Powder Keg card, 2 mana, that gives you a 1-mana card in the hand. Make it rain. Light him up or something. This one, line him up. Just add this into the Nami card pool and she would be even stronger. Probably Spider Force next. Also have Mind Meld. This leads us from the standalone champions to the 4 buckets that need heavy support and heavy synergy from exactly one other region. Most of the time, otherwise you should just build a meme deck. First one would be Tahm Kench. Now, Tahm Kench is a very interesting and fun champion, which I didn't really understand at first when I joined the game, so I want to go over him. The 4-mana 2/6, so a little bit of a weak stat line, and on round start creates this acquired taste in hand. And this acquired taste means that you unit strikes Tahm Kench and then he captures it. Capturing means it's, if you play ever MTG, it's like Banishing Light, where if Tahm Kench ever goes away, the unit comes back. And this can only target enemies. So basically, the enemy strikes you, you take some damage on your Tahm Kench, and then it's captured. And once Tahm Kench has captured 3+ units, he levels up and he obliterates enemies on level up and releases allies. You might be like, can you capture allies as well? Not with acquired haste, but with his flip spell Bio Branch that allows you to capture another ally. Technically, like in POC, you can use this power to capture other allies. You could like detain your own ally. It's rarely going to happen. Most of the time, you will try to capture 3 enemy units, which of course makes Tahm Kench a high risk, high reward champion. If you manage to get him to capture 3 enemies and obliterate them, that's insane. But it basically introduces a minigame where they have to kill your Tahm Kench, which you give them opportunities because they can just, like if they have a +3/+2, they just buff it up and then the strike kills Tahm Kench and doesn't get captured and they get the units back. So he introduces a really interesting minigame. By the way, level up is basically the same, but only he always attacks, always obliterates on attack. Has the same effect like on each attack. And in retrospect, I really like Tahm Kench's design. He's very fun and active. Don't ever sit there and be like, there's nothing I can do about it. You could always have a removal spell for Tahm Kench, for example, in your deck. Or you could have a buff spell and make this strike hurt more. But the main problem you might see is how do you ever capture 3 units of Tahm Kench? He only has 6 health, so if you don't like capture 3 1/1s, it will never work out. And the intended pairing is with Soraka. Soraka heals supported allies for 4. You have cards like the Star Spring, which heal allies for 1. And basically, you want to use this Tahm Kench capture ability to remove units and then heal them back up. That's the idea. Another way Tahm Kench works is with Frostbites. Just frostbite the enemy unit and then capture it. Also quite fun. Funnily enough, Tahm Kench doesn't get counted by Sunburst. He's like one of the only mid-game champions that doesn't get counted by Sunburst because Sunburst silences and then you don't get your units back, so don't make that mistake ever. Overall, this card bucket has like a bunch of self-damage cards, Castle Codger, Boxtopus, Fortune Croaker, Launching Lizard, Vice Fry to like basically give the Soraka some fuel. One big problem this Soraka has is that the Soraka bucket just randomly got nerfed massively. A bunch of cards that used to live here don't live here anymore. And we also have like Spiral Stairs, which is a terrible card. Fletching Stellarcon, which is a terrible card. Camphor, which is terrible. Like not in general is bad, but even especially in this deck where like you never want to target your allies. How does it even target their allies? It doesn't make any sense. And we also have the physical copy of Wish and Destiny's Call, just a bunch of bad cards. And of course, if you only have to go for the support with the Targon side, if your support champion is weak, that makes you as a champion on its own also a little bit weaker. But it's still a definitely viable archetype and one I really enjoy because it's attrition control. You try to grind your opponent out with value. You can also do this as a combo control with the Star Spring. That would be more on the Targon side. Tahm Kench is often more attrition control. You just eat the opponent's unit over and over again, buff up your Tahm Kench, or heal him, and you just run out of stuff. Funny enough, for control deck, the only interaction spell this Bilgewater side has is Shakedown. So Tahm Kench, like, if you want to buff him ever in Expeditions, you would appreciate like a Make It Rain, for example. The Pocket Aces, the one combat trick would be fun here, or even just the Bio Branch. Like, why is Bio Branch in Scouted Out? Misfortune, but not in Mending Touch Tahm Kench, where he actually like would be like a reason to play Tahm Kench, or play it in Tahm Kench decks, whereas there's no reason ever to play Bio Branch in Scouted Out. So this really needs Targon, or Freljord for that matter. Freljord Frostbite sometimes works as well, but Targon is better. Next one that basically locks you into 2 regions is the Terrors from the Deep Nautilus. This Bilgewater and Shadow Isles. Let's take a look at this first. This is of course the deep deck. And note that you don't necessarily have to be in Shadow Isles. It just makes it a lot easier if you are in Shadow Isles. You can technically build like a fast draw deck with PNC. And load up this page first. Explain you what I'm talking about here. So Nautilus is a 7 mana 0/12. It's pretty terrible at first. It's tough and fearsome. And he levels up when you are deep. Deep means you have 15 or fewer cards left in your deck. And start in expeditions, you start with 30 cards in your first battle, so it's pretty easy to achieve by turn 7. If the later you go, the harder it is to achieve, so you have to actively move into some buckets or regions that give you access to going deep, either by the toss mechanic in Shadow Isles or by just general card draw. And when you level up, he just turns into a 13/13 and also makes your sea monster allies cost 2 less. Furthermore, when you level up, you copy tossed allies that cost 4 plus into your deck, so it's a cost, not the attack, so it doesn't copy your Troll Hunters, for example, but it copies your, for example, a Swain if you have it in the deck. Funny combination. The flip is Riptide, which is only ever useful if you have Nautilus on your board. Either stuns an enemy or places a unit into the enemy deck if you have a Nautilus. Funny enough, this doesn't really help you versus a decking scenario, because whenever you won't deck out by tossing too much, but your opponent won't deck out either because you keep putting a unit into their opponent's deck by reshuffling the Nautilus, so they don't deck out either. I find pretty amusing. Of course, if you get him to a 13/13, he's pretty insane and can close out games on his own. And his whole build-around idea is with the deep sea monsters. We have Beast Below, Abyssal Eye, Devourer of the Depths, and Shipwreck Hoarder. Then we have Sea Scarab in Shadow Isles, and many of the toss effects like Tawny Toad live in the Shadow Isles half. We also have Jettison and Drake Dredgers in Bilgewater, so it's definitely possible to build another deck with Nautilus outside of Shadow Isles, but usually you just want to go for the Bilgewater Shadow Isles combination. But it's definitely something I want to try at some point. Pick Nautilus. I did try it before. Nautilus Jinx is pretty sick. Just draw a bunch of cards with Jinx's ability, you go super fast, and then you are hitting deep and play your big sea monsters. This particular archetype, Terrors from the Deep, is paired up with Maokai, who also tosses and summons Zeppelins, and if you toss 25 times or the units have died that often, then he flips and removes your opponent's deck. And usually you just go 3 Nautilus if you want to go for the sea monster archetype. This is not really a mid-range deck, kind of a mid-range deck, but more of a combo control deck, I would say. And for the spells, it's a Jettison, Shakedown, Lure of the Depths. So basically you want to keep on the board with a mid-range game plan, just play some random units, some random small units. Then when you hit your turn deep, usually turn 7, turn 8, then you just take over the game. And yeah, Riptide only playable if you have Nautilus on the board. Don't pick this card up randomly. Shakedown is a bit of a meme here. I don't really know why this is in here. And you have good removal spells as well. And this leads us to the by far weakest champion in Bilgewater, who funnily enough got 2 hard buckets. And the first was actually fine in my opinion. It's called Lurkers, very creative name. Let's take a look at Pyke here in Expeditions. So Pyke, 4 mana 2/3 with quick attack and lurk. The lurk mechanic means that it checks the top card of your deck. If your top card of your deck is a lurker on attack, then all of your lurkers permanently everywhere get +1/+0. Only triggers once per round. So even if you have multiple attacks, it only triggers once. Attack with multiple lurkers, it also only triggers once. Also you don't have to attack with a lurker to trigger lurk, but you can attack with a random unit, and if the top card is a lurker, you will still get this effect. Pyke has a special effect. If he lurks, he turns into Death from Below, a 4 mana fast spell that summons a Pyke striking enemy. You don't have to play this out normally as a 3/3 or 4/3, for example. You can immediately strike something with it, which is very powerful. Problem is to get your Pyke randomly on top of your deck. Either you do some setup with it, or you are very lucky. And he levels up when allied Pykes have dealt 15 damage. Another card that helps with it is his signature spell, Bone Skewer. Allows you to strike with Pyke, and it also counts for level up because it's just allied Pykes in general, not this Pyke. Then he gets put on top of your deck where you can lurk again and then trigger your Pyke again. On his level up form, he has a very powerful, basically LOL ultimate, When he kills an enemy, he strikes the next weakest enemy. So basically it's just a chain. You kill one, you kill the next one, kill the next one, and it just keeps going until you wipe the board. Again, the main problem is to get him to that point. And the main problem of Pyke is if you don't like hit your lurk reliably. I've said before, if you just hit one lurk, most of the lurkers are fine. This one's still just a 4 mana 3/3 with one lurk. 2 lurks makes him a 4 mana 4/3, which is like bearable, similar to Jinx. But to really level him up to make him work, you have to put a lot of effort into him. And just hitting lurk reliably is very hard in expeditions. I think Pyke himself is fine actually. It's his card buckets that really pull him down. So this lurker bucket is still okay. You have like Sharkling and all of the lurk cards, Ripper's Bay, the list randomly, which should definitely be a lurk card. And then to nerf this bucket to make it less consistent, they added in Lost Riches and Monster Harpoon. Monster Harpoon is a good card. Lost Riches is not a good card. And this is just in there to make the archetype less consistent. Similar to Chrono Shift with the Rek'Sai versus the other lurk build-around card. That's a tempo deck. You invest a lot of resources into these high power units. You want to flip your Pyke. You want to get these big attack lurkers and basically close out the game. Doesn't really want to go like into the late game usually. It just wants to build up the board and attack. But it's sometimes very hard to get enough lurkers or enough lurk triggers to make this really work. Funnily enough, the card that distinguishes it from the other lurk bucket is Sharkling, which I find hilarious. And the 2 spells are Monster Harpoon and the list, and of course Bone Skewer. By the way, Bone Skewer doesn't live in the other Pyke bucket either. And the other Pyke bucket is called Predict Lurkers. And let's take a look at this one as well, because some people say Enlightenment is a bad card bucket. Some people say they don't like Mending Touch usually. But in my opinion, this Predict Lurkers is the worst archetype in the whole Expeditions format. And there's literally no card that I ever want in my deck from this Bilgewater side. The Echo side, it's paired up with Echo. I guess the reason behind it is that you want to use Predict to put your Pykes on top and profit, because it's like lurks then. Because the Predict mechanic allows you to pick a card from the among in your deck, shuffle the deck and put the card on top. So you can put your Pyke on top with Predicts and basically level it up this way. You can also like counterfight copies your Pyke. The main problem with this strategy is you literally only have 2 Predict cards in PNZ, Spectral Perfectionist, and it doesn't even live here. That's crazy. It's Time Trick. Didn't find it at first. So these are the only 2 Predict effects. All the other cards like randomly jump up your deck. Doing some lurkers is way better than any lurker you want to duplicate, would want to put in your deck. This Echo Predict Lurkers is fine. Also has Mystic Shot and Aftershock, pretty good. But the Bilgewater half literally has no card in it that I ever wanted in one of my decks. I don't want these random lurkers. Shipwreck Recorder would be okay, but no, I still don't really want it in a random deck. Never want Ripper's Bay, never want Trollfish, never want Bloodbait, never want Pick a Card, never want Lost Riches, never want Sunk Costs. There's literally no reason for me to ever pick this card bucket. Of course, the synergy is terrible. And if you say I want just to have Pyke and more lurkers for my Rek'Sai, I would just advise you to stay away from Bilgewater if you want to draft around Rek'Sai, because then you will see more of the good Shurima lurkers instead of these Ripper's Bay, for example, or Lost Riches, or Pick a Card. They are Predict lurkers. Would still be classified as a tempo deck, or like a combo deck a little bit. The distinguishing card is Shipwreck Recorder, and the only spell in it is Sunk Cost. But I'm just going to say here, never pick this bucket ever. Literally no reason for you to ever pick Predict Lurkers unless you have like PNC in it. And I want to like underline this a little bit with the current LRI stats. This was recorded on the 26th of December 2021. And if you look at it, Nautilus is pretty decent with a low use rate. And far on the end is Pyke with only a 41% win rate, so way below average. Only a use rate of 0.02, despite having 2 buckets. So Nautilus, who has like 1 bucket, is used 7%, and Pyke only 2%. If you compare this to Demacia, you have use rates of like 4%, 0.4%, 0.39%. And yeah, also the win rates, the lowest, no, it's close actually. Nautilus has a little bit of a higher win rate than Fiora, but basically all of the other Demacia champions have like a way higher win rate than Bilgewater right now. Maybe if you watch this like in half a year, it's gotten changed and is very different. I just want to include this. And the main reason, for my opinion, is you have just way too many misfortune buckets, and Tahm, Kench, Pyke, and Nautilus are heavily requiring synergy, so they should each have one bucket at most. Remove this Predict Lurkers bucket, and instead give it to like Twisted Fate or, I don't know, Nami. Why doesn't Nami show up here? That's interesting. Really interesting. Why doesn't Nami show up? Okay, doesn't really matter here. However, this will be the end of my Bilgewater video. I think Bilgewater is fine and pretty strong as a region, but the current design of the buckets doesn't favor it at all. And they should either revert the changes they made to like scout out Misfortune, to the first to the draw Twisted Fate, or just remodel those buckets completely, because I really enjoy playing Bilgewater and I would just wish it would be a little bit stronger right now. This will conclude this video on Bilgewater. We will take a break here from the regional entities. We are currently having missing the Targon, Freljord, PNC, and Banner City. Both Targon and Freljord and Banner City still are missing some champions, and in PNC we don't have Chase added to expeditions yet, and I'm still hopeful that we get him next patch. So we will wait until the next expansion and to continue this review of Targon, Freljord, and PNC and Banner City, and move on to other subjects next week. Next week we will talk about the advanced deck building tips, bucket shaping a little bit, and what I'm going for when I construct my edition decks. Thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a nice new year if it's watching in the recent times. Otherwise, a nice day. Goodbye.